Leslie, thank you so very, very much. And we are with you. We will support you as hopefully you continue to take the fight, no pun intended, to the NLRB and emerge victorious. Tonight's speakers truly represent what this evening is all about: cutting-edge research, worker power, and economic justice. We've had Thea talk about research. We've heard from Katie and Leslie, who have demonstrated very clearly what power is all about. And now we are honored to bring the Reverend William Barber II, whose work epitomizes economic justice. I think it's probably true that for everybody in this room, Reverend Barber needs no introduction. Yet I'm going to give one anyway. He's been recognized most recently as one of those MacArthur geniuses for his work to bring attention to the economic challenges facing all too many Americans. Now, Reverend Barber is the pastor of the Greenleaf Christian Church in Goldsboro, North Carolina. He is the architect of Moral Monday movements, the Moral Monday movement, which began in North Carolina, and founder of Repairers of the Breach, to expand upon the Moral Monday movement to have it go national. And in 2017, he helped launch a revival of 1968's Poor People's Campaign. Now, this prolific speaker believes in the moral imperative of this nation to care for the least of these. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome Reverend William Barber.
Fight on just a little while longer. Fight on just a little while longer. Oh, fight on just a little while longer. I know justice is coming soon. Hold on just a little while longer. Hold on just a little while longer. Whoa, hold on just a little while longer. I know justice is coming soon.
Give it up for Miss Yara Allen, the theomusicologist of the Poor People's Campaign, and for Repairers of the Breach, as she is lifting and teaching movement singing around the country and across the world. And I'm so glad to have her at all places. Thank you so much, dear. Thank you for this opportunity to be with EPI tonight. And let's thank all of the honorees tonight, all of the honorees that have come. Yes. And I told my sister from Mingo County that we're going to hook up with them. And I told my sister in the cage we're going to hook up with her. because that's real fighting, and they deserve what they get and some more. And so I want to be a part of helping any way we can. I want to ask everybody that's in the back to listen up a second. Teachers can talk when other folk are talking, but preachers can't do that too well unless you're saying amen. I've been really wrestling with what to talk about tonight. And as Yara was singing even then, I was thinking, you know, we're really in a fight to save the soul of this nation. And I'm serious about that. And it's bigger than one individual, because sometimes one individual is just the outward symbol or symptom of a deeper malady. Researchers, you know, you can have an anomaly, but that doesn't tell you everything. You have to go deeper, right? You don't base your whole research on just one finding. So one of the things I think is important in bodies like this is to remind people that this is not new. It's not something we've not seen before, nor made it through before. The roots of what we're seeing, the spirit of what we're seeing in this narcissism, in this racism, in this egotism that we're seeing played out not just in the White House, but in the Congress and in 1/4 of the countries around the world. 1/4 have chosen to elect strong men, if you will, persons who are more focused on white hegemony and division than they are trying to embrace the growing dichotomy and diversity of the whole world. And so I want you to know, theologically, in the Bible, for instance, well, let me just read something. It says, your politicians are like wolves, prowling, killing, and rapturously taking whatever they want. Your preachers cover up for the politicians by pretending to have received visions and special revelations, and they say, this is what God wants, when God hadn't said one word. Extortion is rife in your politics. Robbery from the least of these is epidemic in your politics. The poor and the needy and the immigrants are kicked around, abused with no access for justice. The people of the land, from the top to the bottom, practice extortion, commit robbery, they oppress the poor, the needy, and they mistreat the foreigner and the immigrant and deny them justice. I look for someone, I need someone who will stand in the gap and fight for them. Now, that text was written 2,600 years ago, but it could be an op-ed in the Washington Post. I didn't read it in the Hebrew, because, some rabbis I think around here, my Hebrew's a little rusty. I didn't read it in the King James because that was actually the most modern version of a text from Ezekiel 22. Your politicians are like wolves because they are devouring the poor and they are robbing the immigrants of their rights. That could be an op-ed anywhere. Now, 53 years ago, these words were said in Montgomery. When poor and white masses and the former Negro slaves came aware to the fact that they were being fleeced by the emerging Bourbon interests, and they started to unite black and white, Negro and white, into a voting bloc that threatened the business interests of the nation because they were coming together in the South. The Southern aristocracy began immediately to development of a segregated society to keep these black and white, poor and working people from voting together. It may be said of the slavery era that the white man took the world and gave the Negro Jesus, and in the Reconstruction era that the Southern aristocracy took the world and gave the poor white man Jim Crow. He gave him Jim Crow, gave him racism, and when his wrinkled stomach cried out for food that his empty pockets could not provide, he ate Jim Crow, a psychological bird, racism, a psychological bird that told him no matter how bad off he was, at least he was a white man, better than a black man. And this philosophy was used to undermine, to keep black and white, poor and working people from voting together. So it was the threat of the free exercise of the ballot by the Negro connected to the white masses that caused the segregated society. They segregated Southern money from poor whites. They segregated Southern Moors from rich whites. They segregated Southern churches from Christianity. And they segregated Southern minds from honest thinking. And that's what has happened in America every time there is a threat for the possibility of black and white people in the South to vote together and build a great society. Now that was written 53 years ago, but if you take out the word Negro, it could very well describe what's happening in Georgia and in Florida right now. About 50 years ago, this happened, and this was right after the Voting Rights Act passed, August 6, 1965. Kevin Phillips, a Nixon Republican strategist, developed something called the Southern Strategy. The design of the Southern Strategy was to play the race card in a way to drive Southern whites to vote for conservative white politicians and leave the ranks of the Democratic Party that had elected persons like John Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson. Even though by electing them, they would be voting against their own interests. Lee Atwater said of this strategy that we knew that in 1954 you start out by saying nigger, 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 but by 1968 you can't say nigger because of the backfire, so you start talking about policy, like forced busing, and then you get real abstract and you talk about title and cutting entitlements and tax cuts. It sounds like all you want to do is economic things. This is Lee Atwater. But the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites, whites get hurt, but they blame it on blacks, thereby keeping them separated when it comes to voting. When George Wallace stood in the door of the University of Alabama, the next day he got 100,000 congratulative telegrams, and 95% of them were from above the Mason-Dixon line. That's what encouraged him, Wallace, to run. It gets a little confusing sometimes. That's what encouraged Wallace to run in 1964 for the Democratic nomination. Nobody took him seriously, but he won Wisconsin. He won a third of the state's Democratic were cast in Wisconsin he won a third of the state ballots. He won 30% of the votes in Indiana, and all he had was 2 Ku Klux Klansmen running his campaign out of a service station phone book. And he won 23 of the 43 counties in Maryland. People, they don't pay him no mind. He's just loud mouth. His performance was so surprising that George Herbert Walker Bush decided to run for Congress, for the U.S. Senate. He had never run for elective office before, and his campaign basis was, I'm emphatically opposed to the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It tramples on the Constitution, and I'm against the Civil Rights Act because it was passed to protect 14% of the people. I'm worried about the other 15%. And after President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, he told his staff, we just gave the South to the Republicans for your lifetime and mine. And after he signed the Voting Rights Act, he said, we've probably given away the South for the next 50 years. And it is said that that George Wallace became the most important loser of all time. Because 50 years before Trump, he taught the new and far more conservative or extremist Republican Party how to use the language of anti-elitism, anti-communism, and various euphemisms to inflame white voters. This is not new. Kevin Phillips said this about, he wrote a book called The Emerging Republican Majority. It was published after the election, but while it was in manuscript form, it was the Bible of Nixon's 1968 campaign. And in that, Phillips said America was the melting pot that never melted, and explained that all you have to do with American politics is work out who hates who and play them against each other, and you've got it. And Phillips advised Nixon that the Republican Party could win without the black vote. In fact, the best thing would be to paint the Democrats as the black party. And Phillips predicted a new American revolution coming out of the South and the West because of the fears and the objections raised by the civil rights movement and even the women's movement. And he noted that if we play this thing right in the South, white ethnics in the North were also ripe for the picking. That the Irish Democrats in New York would turn on Republican because they didn't like the Jews and the blacks who run the New York Party Democratic machine. The South, Phillips said, would become the base for a new Republican Party, and Harry Dent urged Nixon to use racially coded, strong language, strong enough to persuade white Southerners that Wallace was not a viable alternative, but he was, and the GOP was instructed to follow Phillips' plan for the next 50 years, but always disavow it publicly. What we have seen in the last 2 years is because of an audience that's been cultivated for 50 years. And anybody that tries to make it just about Trump hasn't done their research. They have not done their research. Trump is playing to an audience. And the goal of this was the 50th year, and this is the 50th year since '68. Now, what did we get for this? That's what we've got to show. What we got for this was every state that played this card is also a voter suppression state. And not one of those, every one of those states could have been removed from the coverage of the Voting Rights Act if for 10 years they would have just stopped suppressing the vote, and none of them were able to do it. Every state also that is a voter suppression state is a high poverty state. It is a low union density or state. Every state that's a voter suppression state is a state that has the most politicians that vote to cut taxes on the wealthy, refuse labor rights. Every state that is a voter suppression state toward African Americans is also a state that's refusing living wages and refusing to raise teacher pay. Every state that's a voter suppression state. And the concentration of poverty in this country is in the South. 70% of the poor are white women and children disabled. 52% or 39 million of our children are poor in 2017. 21 million elders are poor, 26 million black people, 38 million Latinos, 8 million Asians, but 66 million white people are poor. And yet in all the poor states that use voter suppression, the majority of white voters are voting for candidates who get elected by racialized voter suppression and gerrymandering, but once they get elected, they then turn policy-wise on the very people that voted for them. And that charade and that game has been going on for 50 years. And with that game, not now today, not one county in this country can you work at minimum wage and afford a basic 2-bedroom apartment. Playing that game, running that, 37 million people still without health care. 2.5 million to 3.5 million people sleep in shelters and are homeless. 7.4 million are on the brink of homelessness. And homelessness is particularly acute for the LGBTQ community. 43% of adults with health insurance struggle every day to pay their deductibles. 30% had a hard time affording medical bills, and 73% cut back on their basic household needs to pay for medical bills. That's what this strategy of dividing people and causing people to hate has brought us. And Trump is playing it, but so is McConnell and Ryan and Grassley and the rest of the bunch. These are not Lincoln Republicans. They are destructionists. They're not even Republican. My granddad was a Republican. And there were the Republicans that helped pass the Civil Rights Act of '64 and the Voting Rights. These are deconstructionists. And why are they deconstructing? They don't want to destroy the democracy. They just want to disable it. They want to disable it like all strong men or women so that the aristocracy or the oligarchs can benefit from it. And sometimes progressive help them. We help them when we try to come up with a way of doing analysis that doesn't take race and poverty seriously. We help them when we don't understand the intersection between systemic racism, systemic poverty, ecological devastation, the war economy, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. We help them when even in our primaries we have debates. And we have 140 million people poor in this country, but we don't have any debate on poverty. 140 million people. We have millions of people without ability to buy unleaded water, though they can get up every morning and buy unleaded gas, and we only talk about it when it comes to Flint. When we do not push a debate that opens up the real problems and exposes the hypocrisy and helps build relationships so that a white woman from West Virginia and a black woman from Mississippi can understand their plight together. But on the other side, as I close, in South Africa, they used to say only a dying mule kicks the hardest. Right in front of your faces now, and this is why you need to be as excited as you ever been about your research. Right in front of your face, you are seeing the growing pains of a third Reconstruction. It's happening. That's what's happening in Florida. That's what's happening in Texas. That's what's happening in Georgia. That's what happened in North Carolina. I've been talking about it for 11 years. When Obama broke through and won, I'm not talking about Obama the person, I'm talking about the movement, the campaign broke through in Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, and South Carolina. It signaled that it was possible to break the Southern strategy, but Democrats still ran from the South and progressive. Now with Abrams and Gilling and Barker out of Texas, you understand Abrams is only 50,000 votes down? 40-some, wait a minute before you clap, but 49% of people still didn't vote. And I wonder when the party really got in. We're going to really have to do some examining. I would suspect they didn't get in up front. I would suspect that they waited and waited. They may have come in the last couple of weeks. But what if we had been all in? All in Texas, all in Florida, all in Georgia. And what we're seeing right now is happening right in front of your face. Now, the commentators on MSNBC and CNN, they're missing it. They're still just talking about, and no offense here, but look at what the white women did. But there's something going on beside what just white women did. I'm proud of that. I got white women that are my aunts, because I'm black, white, and Tuscaroran. But I want to look at everybody, and the commentators are missing the demographic shifts. That the nation is changing, that the South is changing, that you can now lead with a black candidate in the South. You can lead, or you can lead, and you can lead with a black candidate in the South that doesn't have to run from their blackness. They can still wear their dreadlocks and can be dark-skinned and can talk about progressive value. But not only that, you can lead with a white person that doesn't have to be Republican light. If they got their research together, they can run in the South, right? And we in the movement are going to have to show the way forward. We're going to have to show the way forward, because right now, North Carolina, Virginia, Georgia, Florida, Mississippi, Texas, and South Carolina are ripe. That's why we need a campaign that doesn't wait until the election year to organize. We need the campaigns that are willing to go in these states, in these communities, and expose the politicians of division and show how they are actually calling on them to vote based on race and division, but then using their position to hurt the very people. And it can happen. I've seen it happen. I've seen it happen in Mitchell County. When I was invited to Mitchell County, there's 89% Republican, 99% white, and they said, don't go up to Mitchell County. And at first I said, okay. Because it has also one of the highest levels of paramilitary groups. But we went up there, and we're organizing in Mitchell County. I saw Mitchell County develop an all-white NAACP chapter. I saw people in Mitchell County join the Poor People's Campaign. And Mitchell County, North Carolina, is one of the few areas where an incumbent Tea Partier was put out of office when the people saw that he was just running a scam on them. And when we could show them the research. That's why right now, all of us in this room, I know y'all got some connections, the union folk in here, you need to get on the phone, call the Democrats, and tell them now that they got the House, they should immediately have hearings on Jeff Sessions and what he did to allow voter suppression to spread. And once they have the data, they should put together an omnibus bill calling for full restoration of the Voting Rights Act, same-day registration and early voting, and election as a holiday. Tell them, don't play with the power, use it. Tell them that immediately, somebody say immediately. I want y'all to get there. Don't tell them just y'all do it. Say immediately. They need to investigate the child abductions on the border. They need to understand Sessions' role in that. They need to show the nation that this wouldn't be happening if those were wealthy black children or white children. This is because they're brown children, immigrant children, and they need to immediately pass legislation, not just to get the children back, but to provide immigrant justice for every immigrant. Immigration reform now. They need to immediately pass universal health care. Don't wait till after 220. You ran on it, pass it now. Don't worry about if McConnell will join with you or come across the aisle. We're going to change the other side of the aisle. You just pass what you can while you have an aisle. They need to immediately pass a bill to raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And they need to do it with the data that shows if you do that, the GNP will rise and taxes will go up and what the coffers of the government have, and it will benefit the society. They need to immediately repeal the tax cut, but they need to hold a hearing first, get the data, and show how that tax cut is going to undermine Social Security and Medicaid and expose it to the American people, and then pass a bill to repeal it. They need to immediately pass a bill calling for the restoration of the $9 billion DeVos has cut from public education. Immediately. Immediately they need to pass prison reform and make sure that people don't have to, they can vote even once they've served their time and paid their life. Immediately. This would be a moral agenda that could raise a populist response. But a populist response rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values. And they should show how voter suppression and the lack of a minimum wage and the lack of health insurance is negatively impacting the country, and they should show it region by region and race by race, so that people can understand that when you hurt social programs, you might hurt a larger percentage of black people, but in raw number, you hurt more white people. And the truth of the matter is, if you black and you don't have health care and can't pay your light bill, and you white and don't have health care and can't pay your light bill, or you're Asian or brown or native and you can't pay your light bill and you're sick, you're gonna be black in the dark sick, because we all black when the lights are not on. So we need to shine some light on that. And then they should not pass what the Senate will compromise on, because McConnell is not a fair broker. And I don't know, how many more times do you got to be slapped in the face to recognize people going to slap you in the face? They should pass what is constitutionally, morally right, what establishes justice, and stop focusing on Trump alone and being defensive. It's time to go offensive. It's time to go on the offensive. Huh? It's time to, and we need to fight in the House. I'm through. We need to fight in the Congress so that people will fight in the state houses. And the House members need to fight up here, and then when they go on recess, they need to go back home and tell their members to fight at the state houses, because the state house is really where so much of this stuff is going on. And we need to expose the lie of the white Southern strategy and that divide and conquer, and show how this kept people. So I'm going south. And I leave here, I'm on my way to Mississippi for 3 days. And for the rest of now, until 2020, the Poor People's Campaign and all of our people that are joining up, a whole lot of it, we're going south. I hope EPI will go with us. I hope IPS will go with us. It's time to take Trump's Trump card. And the Trump card is the South. And we don't even have to win everybody. We can just get a remnant, get a 10% or 20% of folk to come together that's been fooled by the Southern strategy. And it's time for us to do what our foreparents had to do. Stop. There's a time you have to stop whining. And so let me close here. It was 1857. A Supreme Court justice had been forced onto the court that should not have been there. He was pushed through the nomination process. His name was Justice Taney. He became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. And in March of 1857, he presided over the courts when the courts ruled in the Dred Scott decision 7-1 that a black man or black person had no rights that a white man ever had to abide by. And some people said it's over. Movement's over. Abolition is over. It's nothing. In May of 1857, Frederick Douglass rises. And Frederick Douglass says, listen, this is a bad decision, bad judge. He says, to decide against this right in the person of Dred Scott, or the humblest and most whip-scarred bondsman in this land, is to literally decide against God. It is an attempt to change the image and subscription of the everlasting God into a speechless piece of merchandise. It's bad. But then Frederick Douglass said, if it were at all likely that the people of these free states would tamely submit to this demonical judgment, I might feel gloomy and sad over it. And possibly it might be necessary for my people to look for a home in another country. But as the case stands, in spite of this decision, in spite of this Supreme Court justice, we have nothing to fear. In one point of view, we, the abolitionists and the colored people, should meet this decision, unlooked for and monstrous as it is, in a cheerful spirit. They've actually done us a favor, because this very attempt to blot out forever the hopes of an enslaved people may be the one necessary link in the chain of events preparatory to the downfall and complete overthrow of the whole slave system. Because the whole history of the anti-slavery movement is studied with proof that all measures devised and executed with a view to allay and diminish the anti-slavery agitation has only served to increase, intensify, and embolden that agitation. Could it be, my friends, that what we are seeing today in all of this ugliness, Julianne, should only embolden, intensify, and increase our agitation? Sometimes in a bad moment, you have to do what Frederick Douglass did after the Dred Scott decision, what Abraham Lincoln did after the Gettysburg, what Rosa Parks did after the death of Emmett Till, what civil rights leaders did after the 4 girls were blown up in a church in Birmingham 17 days after the March on Washington, what students did after Swana, Cheney, and Goodman were killed, and what Coretta Scott King did after her husband was killed. She kept on leading the movement. She kept on standing up. And what they did to make us stop and be demoralized, instead, it strengthened their resolve, and it increased and emboldened and intensified their agitation. So to all of these researchers, all of you that got what we need in the movement, all of you that have the footnotes so that when we talk loud, we won't be wrong. This is the time for you to help us stand up to hate and stand up to meanness like never before. We need you to love truth and justice. We don't need you to be mourning. We need you to be researching. We don't need you to be scared. We need you to give us the statistic. We don't need you to run. You need to run to us. Now is the time for you to embolden, increase, and intensify this agitation. You need to have us so researched with so many facts that we can break through everything. You need to fill our minds with so much that I can't even preach it all. You need to give us what we need to inspire the people, to tell the story, to take down the lies, to build up the truth.